Hey everybody, welcome back. We're going to be talking about chapter 5 next. And I think I misspoke in my last video. So if you're watching this and you're wondering what happened to chapter 4, no, we didn't have a recording for chapter 4. That chapter is on mediated communication. And while I would recommend reading it, we don't have any course objectives tied to that chapter. So we aren't going to spend a lot of the time talking about it. But you're in the right place. We're ready to talk about verbal communication, which is chapter 5 in our textbook. We're going to define verbal communication, talk about some specific skills with regard to verbal communication, and then also some challenges. And I'll just tell you guys, I've been recording for a while today. One of my cats has decided to be here on my desk. So I apologize if you see her standing up or walking around or her tail coming through. Her name's Baby, and she's just wanting to spend time with me and you guys. So, all right, so let's define verbal communication. It's just like it sounds, it's not a real tricky definition. And by the way, most of communication, you'll probably hear me say this a lot, what we're doing or what we're talking about is not challenging to understand. Most of the concepts I think make really good sense. I spend time talking about them because the challenge for most of us is applying them, applying the concepts to real life in an effective way. So that's why we're taking the time to talk about it. Verbal communication is just the words we use to communicate. Okay, so it's helpful then to think about the words. Two ways of thinking about definitions. You probably have heard this in maybe some other classes. If you haven't, you probably will hear it as a college student. There's a denotative meaning, and then there's a connotative meaning to a lot of words. You see here a picture of the dictionary, and that's because I like to have like a memory mnemonic. D is in dictionary, just like D is in denotative, meaning when we go to use a word, if we use the meaning that comes from the dictionary, then it's a denotative meaning. If we use the word in a more conversational way with an understood or implied meaning, then we're using the connotative meaning. And I put the word hot here because if we were talking about, oh, that's hot, the denotative, if I were trying to understand from a denotative perspective, I would think, oh, you're telling me the temperature's hot outside. It's actually hot to the touch, or again, the temperature. But if I were talking about it in the context of something you're wearing or, something you said or what have you, then obviously I'm not talking about the temperature. I'm talking about it could be replaced with the word cool. I don't know exactly what the younger folks are saying today, but maybe they're saying that's dope. And we don't really mean something is drugs when we say that, right? We're talking about, again, cool or something to that effect. So that's denotative versus connotative. Something else I just want to draw your attention to, because I know most of you are not communication majors and you're thinking, this is the one class I have to take, and I don't maybe even understand why. One takeaway you can get from this slide, we're going to talk about the cooperative principle, again, is how to be a better communicator in terms of what the expectations are of us. Ideally, if we're being, effective communicators, we would be informative, honest, relevant, and also clear. And I would add to that by saying if you're writing, you would also want to try to be concise and thorough. In short, we would want to try to be ethical with our communication choices, and we would want to keep the audience in mind. That's the cooperative part of this, because we can talk all we want about whatever we want, but even as I sit here now, this lecture that I'm doing isn't required. I already know this material also, so I'm not doing this for me. I'm doing this to share information that hopefully you all can find value in and then apply to other places in life. And that's just sort of the takeaway from this slide is, are we adding value to other people when we communicate with them by doing these things, or are we not adding value, right? So again, I'm not trying to persuade you to be honest and relevant and clear and informative, but if you want to be a good communicator and use your communication skills to maintain positive relationships, these are 4 things you could do. The next thing that I want to talk about, you've probably heard before also, but again, the concepts are easy. It is difficult to maybe apply this, especially when emotions are involved in everyday life. There's the difference between I and you and we language. Okay. Sorry, I wanted to check and make sure it was recording. The you language can be something that creates distance between people, particularly when there is blame attached to it, because it focuses the issue or the challenge on the other person behaviors or actions maybe. So if I say you never show up to class and or you are creating a distraction, I'm very clearly putting blame on you. And as you can imagine, if I do that, if you're the student I'm saying this to, it's very easy to become defensive and maybe even disconnect, certainly, and or stop coming to class or stop wanting to participate just by the words that I used. If I use I language, then I get to take ownership of what it is I'm feeling, thinking, and I also get to express my concern in a way that's empowering for me without placing blame on you. So back to the situation, if somebody were really disruptive in class, instead of saying, you're really causing problems, I can say, hey, I'm going to need to ask you guys to settle down or save your conversations for later. And just by reframing it to here's what I need, it changes the way you receive my message. And maybe you're more likely to comply or go along with me, not as a way of manipulation, but because I didn't place any blame on you. I just took ownership of my own thoughts and feelings, and then we move forward. The other thing we can do with our language is use the we version of that. When we do that, we create inclusion, and then we bring more connection to the relationship. So if I want to, let's say, persuade a roommate to start cleaning up more, I could say, I'd like you to clean up more, but even that could be taken the wrong way. If I thought there was some distance between us and I wanted to maybe bridge that gap a little bit, and I thought, I can do a better job as well, I could say to my roommate, looks like we have a really dirty place here. I'm starting to notice bugs every once in a while and I can't find anything. I think we should create some kind of chore list. As you can imagine, that sounds very different than you never pick up after yourself, you're causing a lot of problems, or even I am having an issue. And by the way, if you want to say to somebody, you're a jerk, simply saying, I think you're a jerk, and making it an I message is not the intended effect of an I message. Again, the point of the I message is to take ownership. But I always like to circle back to that before I get beyond this slide, because in some of the homework assignments I've had over the years, I would have students turn you messages into I messages, and that's when I would get pretty commonly, I should say. So we have those choices. We can do whatever we like, but we will probably get different results based on the verbal communication or the words that we choose, particularly based on the person we're using them with. Here is an example from the textbook, or I should say a few examples of different situations and when you can use you, I, and we language. I won't go through this because you do have this illustration in your book as well. So I will leave this to you to check out. But again, these are just strategies you could use in your everyday communication. And then it illustrates kind of the different results you would get by just changing your language. So those were some of the skills, things you can do. Some of the challenges that we experience just in thinking of verbal communication include verbal aggression. And that's when we're using our language to attack personal attributes. It's, many of us grew up with the sticks and stones, break my bones, but words will never hurt me. I think we know now that words can hurt people. Again, it's more of a connotative meaning. They don't literally hurt people, but they can certainly hurt people's feelings. And if done enough, like in the case of cyberbullying that you see here, over technology, and of course, over a period of time, especially if a number of people are involved, people can get hurt or will hurt themselves. We unfortunately see instances of that, particularly on college campuses, at least every year. So it would just be helpful to be mindful that our words do have impact on other people, or they can. The other side of that, just as a side note, is if you're somebody who has been cyberbullied or experienced verbal aggression, I would say, you have a choice as to whether or not you internalize those words. it all comes down to choice. Certainly, there are a lot of other factors, and I didn't grow up at an age of time when people could cyberbully me, in high school or college. I just didn't, it didn't exist then. But knowing what I know now, I know that even if those people are verbally trying to attack me or cyberbully me, I don't have to let it impact me. I'm on social media now. I'm doing some things to promote actually some positive self-talk and changes. And not everybody's going to respond really well to what I have to say. They're not going to believe it. They're not going to agree with it. They're not going to like it. They'll pick me apart. And this is something I have to remind myself, which is it is what it is. It's other people's opinions. They may be going through something, and I just happen to be the recipient of their negativity or aggression. I don't have to accept it. The reason I share that is because, again, every semester, when I talk about some of these things with my classes, or I used to do this in person, I would have students come up to me after class and say, that has happened to me, or I knew somebody who experienced that really badly. So I just like to circle back and make sure you guys know you get to choose whether or not you internalize the negativity that's coming at you or not. This is an image here that you see, and I know it's a little bit blurry. I've included it even though it's a little bit blurry. When we get to the end of our class, we'll be talking more about visual aids. This is a good example of a visual that I like. It's a lady or girl, woman sitting on her couch, maybe in a bathrobe, and her computer's open. She has things like messages in little pockets of blurbs saying, "You're a loser, you have no friends, no one likes you, you're ugly." So if she's internalizing all of that, of course, it's going to, paint a picture in her mind if she accepts it. But this image, I was saying, is not the best image I could have used because it isn't super crisp and clean. So I just want to draw your attention to that. That's why I put it in here, is to remind me to tell you that. And in fact, I'm modeling most of a lot of what you would want to do in a PowerPoint, and in this case, not maybe want to do in a PowerPoint as we go through the course, because we won't have a lot of time to spend on all of the do's and don'ts. So that's why this image is here. In terms of additional challenges, deception is also a huge potential challenge, I suppose. That's when we're either being uninformative, untruthful, irrelevant, or vague for the purposes of deceiving someone else. And we'll break those down in just a second. Then the last would be something called defamation. I'm sure many of you have heard of this in terms of like defamation of character. It's when we're intentionally spreading false information in order to cause harm to someone else. There is a difference between saying, let's talk about maybe restaurants or whatever. Here's my experience at this restaurant or doctor's office, and here's how I felt. That's one thing. That's my perception. If I change that to, these people are horrible, they stole from me, or, start making accusations so that business gets in trouble, I could actually be sued for defamation. So we'd want to just be mindful of some of those challenges. Not, maybe none of you will ever have to deal with that, and that would be great. In terms of deception, this is you're looking at a visual from our chapter as well, types of deception. Again, we have avoidance, concealment, lying, and being vague. I don't think there's necessarily one that's better than the other. Avoidance is when somebody just won't talk about the issue or something that needs to be talked about. Concealment is when we have like a partial truth, but we're concealing or hiding the parts that maybe aren't flattering to us. Then there's outright lying, which is just sharing something that's entirely false. And then there's being vague, which is maybe I use partial examples or I use ambiguous language that really doesn't answer the question. Like maybe I'm answering questions with questions, that kind of thing. Typically in an in-person class, I will ask students to raise their hands and tell me which of these they think is best. If you had to deal with some kind of deception, I don't know. It's usually split between avoidance and concealment. There really is no good way, right? There's no winning here because it's deception. We can't control, again, how other people communicate with us, but we can certainly control whether or not we deceive other people. So I include this because it's something that we have the opportunity to change if we want to, or at least be mindful of. Again, we talked about verbal communication and we defined that. We talked about some communication skills with regard to verbal communication. And then we also talked about some of the challenges. Again, I hope you guys found this information to be helpful, and I hope you will go ahead and read the chapter as you prepare for the assignments and then watch the next video. Thanks, guys.